So it looks like there are two flood stories in the flood story. And we've identified them entirely on the basis of their plot, right? That is on the basis of the story, right? How many of this and who and what and where. And we used that as the rationale for separating the two stories because that was the thing that was bothersome in the first place, right? The stuff that was problematic for us as readers was how long does the flood last, right? So solving how long the flood lasts is the way we went about separating the two stories out. But once we've done that, once we've done the act of separating the stories into their two columns, as it were, and then connecting all the pieces that connect entirely on the basis of the story, we might notice that there are also particular words and phrases that fall into only one of the two stories. These aren't meaningful, like particularly meaningful words or phrases, right? The difference between all flesh and all existence is nil, right? Just two ways of saying the same thing. Which is to say, if the story were fine, we would never be like, it says all flesh here and all existence over there. I bet there's two stories. You'd never do that. It's just that after the fact, it turns out that that's the case. All flesh, all existence. Destroy, blot out. Perish and die. These are synonyms, but they fall entirely into one of the two stories consistently. And the one that I don't have on the screen yet, but I'm about to, is perhaps the most striking of all, which is one story uses the title God and the other one uses the divine name, right? The Lord, or the Tetragrammaton. Totally consistently. Even that I wouldn't say is a reason to divide up the story into two, right? I know that Yahweh and God are the same, right? So did they. So just switching back and forth between names isn't really a reason to divide up a text into two stories. But it's pretty notable that once you divide the stories on the basis of plot, the divine names and titles go along with them. What's more, you may have noticed, if you're paying close attention, that each one of these two stories has connections with one and only one of the two creation stories we looked at the last couple of weeks. The first flood story, the one that was in red, clearly relies on Genesis 1, right? And so I already talked about, right, this idea of the world as having waters above and below, right? Using the same words, right? The fountains of the deep, the Tehom, and the expanse, right? It's the same concepts, it's the same words, right? And again, the flood here is an undoing of the creation of Genesis 1. We have, of course, the re-blessing of the animals, right? Again, the animals are blessed first to be fruitful and multiply. And we have the re-blessing of mankind with the same words, be fruitful and multiply. And we have direct references to the state of being in creation, right? Remember that in Genesis 1, humans are vegan, right? They are given to eat the grasses, right? And the plants and the trees. And the flood story, right, changes that, right? With direct reference. It used to be that you could only eat, right, vegetables. Now you can eat meat, albeit with restrictions. And now we can actually understand the rationale for the flood according to this story, right? According to the initial state of the world in Genesis 1, everyone's supposed to be peaceful, right? It's supposed to be vegan, humans and animals, right? Everyone's supposed to be getting along. But by the time of the flood, the earth is filled with violence, right? Go back. The earth is filled with violence, right? Man and animals alike are killing each other, right? This is the opening of the story says, right? The earth was corrupt because it was filled with violence. Everyone's killing each other, it turns out. So everything must be destroyed, humans and animals both. And then, of course, there's the reference to God making man in his image, right? Right? Direct reference to Genesis 1. Right? So again, overall, this first flood story, the red story, if you will, is an uncreation and a recreation entirely in line with the imagery in Genesis 1. There's no elements of the Genesis 2 Garden of Eden story here anywhere. Now, since we're going to connect the first flood story with Genesis 1, we might just assume that the second one goes with the Genesis 2 story. But there are, in fact, also explicit connections. Here's one. Right? In the flood story here, God promises not to curse the earth again. Well, when did God curse the earth the first time? Back in Genesis 3, in that second creation story. I'll give you one more. We just talked about the rationale for the flood according to the first flood story, the red one, right? Because everything's violent. Okay, but in the second flood story, in this blue one, right, the rationale that God gives for bringing the flood is that humans are wicked. Okay? Humans are wicked according to that story. So humans should be destroyed. Why do the animals all have to die? Right? God could destroy humans in all sorts of ways, right? Plagues or whatever, right? The animals, why do the animals have to die if it's just humanity that's wicked? Because according to the second creation story, why do animals exist at all? Animals exist in the second flood story, in the second creation story, only because humans exist, right? If there's a world without humans, there's no need for animals, right? So if we're going to get rid of the humans, we can just wipe the whole thing out. Okay. Therefore, we're not therefore talking about individual episodes with literary issues, right? A creation account that's got problems and a flood story that's got problems. What we're talking about is continuous stories that go from creation through the flood and actually well beyond. And this is the entire Pentateuch from start to finish. And following the same basic reading practices, that is, separating stuff that can't go together and connecting the stuff that must go together, we end up with, in total, 4 narrative threads running through the entirety of the Pentateuch. And these are known as the sources of the Pentateuch. And it's from these 4 sources that the Pentateuch was put together.